Judge Amy Coney Barrett thought she was walking into another debate. She could dominate until Jasmine slid something across the table that flipped the entire conversation and the country on its head. The cameras panned slowly across the sleek glass table, the studio lights perfectly calibrated, the air too quiet to feel natural. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, "Live, a nation in dialogue, race, law, and representation in American politics." It was a Thursday night special, the kind of panel that usually featured familiar faces, polite disagreement, and just enough edge to go viral. But tonight, something was different. The network hadn't announced the full guest list until minutes before the broadcast. That's when Twitter lit up. Judge Amy Coney Barrett, sitting Supreme Court Justice, constitutional originalist, and a legal mind rarely seen outside of court transcripts, had agreed to join the conversation, not as a jurist, but as an off-the-record legal analyst. It was unusual, unprecedented even. She wouldn't be ruling, she wouldn't be wearing robes, but she'd be watching, commenting, judging in every way that mattered. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett was already seated when Barrett entered the studio. Calm, poised, her navy blazer crisp, her demeanor unreadable. She offered a brief nod when Barrett sat down, not out of deference, but acknowledgement. Barrett returned it with a tight smile, the kind that said, "I see you. But I don't expect much." They weren't seated next to each other. A moderator sat between them. Two more panelists flanked the ends of the desk, pundits with polished smiles and predictable points. But everyone in the room knew who this segment was really about. Behind the scenes, a junior producer whispered into her headset, "This is going to be the one." The floor manager gave the countdown. 5, 4, 3. The red light on the main camera blinked on. The moderator leaned forward, voice smooth and practiced. "Tonight, we explore the crossroads of law, race, and representation, and the role perception plays in power." Crockett folded her hands. Barrett tilted her chin. They hadn't said a word yet, but the tension was already building, slow and sharp like a drawstring being pulled tight. No one could have predicted what was about to happen, except maybe Jasmine. She'd been waiting for this. The first question went to Barrett. "Justice Barrett, how do you see the role of judicial restraint in navigating today's cultural divisions?" She didn't miss a beat. "Increasingly," she said, her tone measured, deliberate, "we're seeing legal arguments muddied by emotional rhetoric. The law must remain grounded, dispassionate, focused on structure, not sentiment." It was delivered without malice, polished, almost academic. But Crockett heard what wasn't being said, and who it was being said about. The moderator turned next to Crockett, asking about legislative overreach in state voting laws. She answered plainly, backed by facts, but didn't bite. Not yet. Barrett offered a follow-up commentary. "I think the challenge," she said, "is when elected officials elevate narrative over constitutional principle, especially when identity becomes a substitute for evidence." Crockett didn't flinch. She just nodded slightly, as if filing the sentence away for later. The panel moved on. Topics shifted from voter ID laws to education funding. Barrett cited precedent with surgical precision. Crockett responded with policy impacts and community data. The other panelists stayed in the shallows. Talking points, sound bites, familiar terrain. But a subtle game was unfolding between Barrett and Crockett, not with volume, but with language. Barrett never raised her voice. She didn't have to. Her critiques were laced into phrases like emotional tone, identity-centered argument, and lack of objectivity. Crockett caught everyone, because she'd heard them before, just not always this directly, and not always from someone with Barrett's kind of power. But Crockett didn't push back, not yet. She waited, patient, composed. Her pen tapped lightly against her notepad, her eyes steady on Barrett, even when she wasn't speaking. She knew what was coming. She had brought it with her. And while Barrett spoke in the language of courts and clauses, Crockett was reading something deeper, the subtext, the framing, the strategy. What the audience didn't know, what Barrett hadn't yet realized, was that Crockett wasn't just here to answer questions. She was here to reveal the ones no one wanted to ask, and she had the receipts. They were sitting quietly in the Navy folder on her lap, waiting. The question came just past the halfway mark. Congresswoman Crockett, the moderator began, how do you respond to critics who say the rhetoric from some public figures, yourself included, has become too emotionally charged for constructive political discourse? It was carefully worded, but the intent wasn't subtle. Crockett didn't blink. She looked directly at the moderator, then past him, toward Barrett. I think, she said slowly, we should start by being honest about what's driving these conversations. Her voice was calm, even. But something in the air shifted. She reached down and, without any fanfare, pulled a plain navy folder from her lap, the same one she'd been carrying since she arrived. She placed it gently on the table in front of her and opened it. I wasn't planning to do this tonight, she said, but since we're talking about tone and how certain voices are perceived. She removed a single sheet of paper, held it up, then slid it across the table to the moderator. This, she said, is a leaked internal memo. The panel went still. The moderator looked down at the document, unsure if he should read it aloud. It was circulated among a select group of judicial clerks and legal consultants earlier this year, Crockett continued, outlining language strategies for framing minority female public officials, not based on merit, not based on policy, based on optics, specifically emotional framing. She glanced briefly at Barrett, then back to the camera. It calls us combative, unreliable under pressure, and, this is a quote, emotional liabilities to their party and the public trust. The studio fell silent. Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't look angry. She just let the words hang there. The moderator shifted uncomfortably. One of the panelists reached for a glass of water and missed the coaster. The sound of glass tapping the table echoed louder than it should have. I don't bring this up to stir controversy, Crockett said. I bring it up because this language didn't come from strangers. It came from inside a system that claims to be neutral. And then she folded her hands and said nothing more. The memo was in the moderator's hands now, and the air had changed. Barrett hadn't moved, not during the statement, not during the silence, not even when the moderator cleared his throat and quietly handed the document off camera to a producer for verification. But Crockett saw it, the shift, small but unmistakable. Barrett's jaw clenched once. Her posture tightened just slightly, like a piano wire being tuned a half-turn too far. I assume you're not suggesting this document is authentic, Barrett said, her voice cool, crisp. Crockett didn't look away. It is, she replied, and it was circulated from a chamber you know intimately. There was no accusation in her tone, no heat, just clarity. Barrett's eyes narrowed. Circulated by whom? By those who've worked under your former clerks, passed along through private legal listservs. It was never meant for public view, but here we are. A low exhale from one of the other panelists. The camera operator adjusted focus mid-shot. The silence was no longer polite. It was pressure. Barrett sat back slightly, trying to regain her distance. That document is unverified, she said, and its relevance to this discussion is tenuous at best. But its language, Crockett said, matches yours. Almost exactly, especially when you talk about tone, emotion, identity over principle. Barrett's head turned sharply. You're twisting my intent. No, Crockett said, still calm. I'm revealing your impact. The moderator, caught in the crossfire, tried to steer the conversation elsewhere. Perhaps we... No, Barrett cut in. If we're going to address insinuations on live television, we should be clear. She reached forward, tapping the desk with one finger. Are you accusing me of endorsing a document like this? Crockett shook her head once. I'm not accusing, she said. I'm connecting dots. Another beat of silence. The producer re-entered the earpiece feed. The memo was real. No watermark. No forgery. Original sender traced back to a policy aide with clerkship connections. The moderator's lips parted slightly, then closed again. Gasps didn't echo in rooms like this, but they vibrated, soft, invisible, seismic. Barrett's mask hadn't cracked, not fully, but it had slipped, and everyone had seen it. The producers didn't cut to commercial. They could have. They almost did. But something about the stillness on set, The tension curling under the studio lights made them hold. The feed stayed live. The audience stayed locked in. And Jasmine Crockett, steady as ever, leaned forward. She didn't speak with outrage. She didn't raise her voice. She simply opened the folder again and pulled out a second copy of the memo. "If you'll allow," she said, "I'd like to read a few excerpts. For context." Barrett said nothing, but her fingers tapped once, sharply, against the table's edge. Crockett didn't wait. Frame assertive responses as emotionally reactive. She read the words cleanly. Label counter-arguments as personal rather than principled. She looked up. This language wasn't written in a vacuum. It was designed, tested, circulated, and it's being used. Barrett shifted, crossed her arms. Crockett continued. Targets who appear frustrated or speak passionately should be described using language like unhinged, combative, or unstable. She let the final word hang in the air. This isn't about judicial reasoning. It's about image. It's strategy. But more than that, it's bias. And not the kind you write in law books. The kind you embed in tone, in framing, in expectations. Barrett leaned forward suddenly. "That's enough." Her voice wasn't loud, but it cracked with something unexpected. Not control, not confidence, frustration. "You've made your point," Barrett said, "or at least your accusation." Crockett tilted her head just slightly. "I haven't made any accusations. I've only quoted what's written." Barrett cut in again, faster this time, sharper. "This is an ambush. On live television, you're turning a serious legal conversation into a political spectacle." Crockett's expression didn't change. "I'm not the one who wrote the memo," she said. The panel was quiet, too quiet. One of the other guests glanced off camera, unsure whether to speak or stay seated. Barrett took a slow breath, but the calm was gone. "Ambushing the judiciary for viral clips might score you points in the press," she said tightly, "but it undermines trust in the entire legal system." And there it was, not legal analysis, not measured critique, just defensiveness and deflection, which only made what happened next land harder. Crockett didn't blink. "I'm not ambushing anyone," she said, her voice still low, deliberate. "I'm revealing what's already happening, quietly, behind closed doors." She reached into the folder again, pulling out a small stack of printouts, clipped neatly. She didn't wave them or dramatize. She simply held them up. "These are emails," she said, "from two former staffers, one who clerked under a federal judge, another who worked briefly on a judicial speechwriting team." Barrett exhaled through her nose, her eyes narrowing, but she didn't speak. "These emails confirm that similar language to what's in this memo has been circulated before, not just once, repeatedly, quietly, internally." The moderator leaned forward, visibly tense. "Are you saying this strategy is systemic?" "I'm saying it's familiar," Crockett replied, "to a lot of us." She placed the emails on the desk in front of her one by one. This one, dated last fall, mentions managing the optics of pushback from tone-sensitive electeds. Another includes the phrase emotional elevation risk, in reference to a black woman lawmaker giving passionate testimony during a committee hearing. She didn't say her name. She didn't have to. Barrett was no longer looking at Crockett. She was staring ahead, frozen. "And then there's this," Crockett added, "an interview you gave to a legal symposium in 2021. You said, 'Public discourse is increasingly compromised by those who mistake emotional urgency for constitutional clarity.'" A direct quote, on camera, on record. "I remember that quote," Crockett said softly, "because it wasn't new. It's been said in different ways, by different people for decades, and it's almost never aimed at men." That line landed hard. The panel sat in stunned silence. "This isn't just about you, Justice Barrett," Crockett added. "It's about how certain voices get coded, how the tone becomes the argument, how the reaction becomes the reason to dismiss the message." She didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She just let the receipts speak. And when the moderator tried to pivot away from the discomfort, Crockett didn't stop him, because the damage was already done, not by yelling, but by telling the truth, calmly, and letting it echo in the silence that followed. Barrett had been shifting in her seat for the last few minutes, not obviously, just enough for those watching closely to notice the change. The control she was known for, the icy discipline, the measured language, it was starting to fray at the edges, and then it broke. "I've had enough," she said, sharper now, louder than anyone expected from her. The studio lights didn't flicker, but the energy in the room did. "You've turned this entire segment into a political trap," she snapped, voice climbing. "This was supposed to be a conversation about law, about the Constitution, but you came here to perform." Crockett didn't move. Barrett pressed forward. "You're not interested in jurisprudence or precedent. You're interested in provoking headlines, weaponizing race and gender as shields against accountability." The moderator froze. The other panelists stopped breathing. And then Barrett said it. "You people always twist the law to fit your agenda." No one moved, not even the cameraman. The words hit the air like shrapnel. There was no way to walk them back, no way to soften them or reframe them as something else. It was live. It was clear. It was caught. And for the first time all night, Amy Coney Barrett wasn't being precise. She was being reactive. Crockett still hadn't spoken. She didn't need to. The silence did more damage than any counterpoint ever could. In the control room, the producers were frozen. One of them hovered over the cut to break button, but didn't press it. Not yet, because something was about to happen. And it wasn't coming from Barrett. Crockett didn't respond right away. She let the words sit. "You people always twist the law to fit your agenda." She didn't look angry. She looked certain, like she'd heard it before, like she expected it. Then she said, calmly, "That phrase right there? That's the problem." One sentence, no emotion, just truth, with a full stop at the end. She leaned forward slightly, not to intimidate, not to posture, but to be unmistakably clear. "And that's why I brought the memo." She tapped it once on the table with her fingertips. Just once, like a period at the end of a long sentence. The moderator opened his mouth, then closed it again. Crockett continued, her voice even lower now, like she was speaking directly to the millions who'd be watching the clip later, frame by frame. "You can write opinions," she said, "but some of us are living them." Barrett didn't respond. She couldn't. The line landed not like a punch, but like a slow, sharp truth that cut deeper the longer it sat. And the studio fell into complete, absolute silence. No talking points, no rebuttals, no clever pivots. Just silence. The kind that reveals everything that came before it. And Crockett didn't need to say anything else. Because when the truth is that loud, you don't need to yell. You just let the silence do the rest. The first clip hit Twitter before the credits even rolled. Barrett's voice, sharper than anyone had ever heard, saying the words, "You people always twist the law to fit your agenda." Then Crockett's calm response. Then the memo. The 3 moments cut together. No commentary, no narration, just the raw sequence. By the time the East Coast went to bed, it had already passed 500,000 views. By morning, it was everywhere. Cable news, podcasts, morning radio, college group chats, legal blogs, op-eds, everywhere. Some focused on Barrett's outburst, others on Crockett's stillness. But what couldn't be ignored, what no one could talk around, was the memo. Legal experts split. Some defended Barrett, calling the memo irrelevant and accusing Crockett of political theater. Others admitted what many had whispered about for years, that judicial language was sometimes coded, often strategic, and rarely neutral. A former federal clerk posted a thread confirming they had seen similar language, not always in writing, but in tone, in feedback, in off-the-record conversations about how to handle unruly witnesses or difficult legislators. By noon, 2 more former staffers had come forward, one anonymously, one on the record. The language in the memo wasn't fiction, it was framework. Network ratings soared. It was their highest-rated segment of the quarter, but the backlash was swift too. Editorials questioned the ethics of having a sitting Supreme Court justice appear in a live media panel. Judicial impartiality was called into question. Law professors debated it in real time on LinkedIn threads and live streams. The court released no statement. Barrett's office went quiet. And Crockett? She didn't tweet. She didn't schedule a follow-up interview. She waited. Let the dust swirl. Let the truth settle. Because she knew the clip wasn't the story. The silence that followed it was. Barrett vanished from public view for 4 days. No appearances, no speeches, no comments. Behind the scenes, her clerks scrambled. There were reports of internal meetings, private calls with colleagues, quiet conversations about damage control. Meanwhile, Crockett held a press conference on the steps of a local community center in Houston. No stage, no teleprompter. Just a mic clipped to a folding podium. She wore the same navy blazer from the panel. "I'm not here to celebrate what happened," she said. "I'm here to clarify why it matters." The crowd was quiet, listening. "This isn't about one judge," she said. "It's about a pattern. One that hides behind civility while rewriting the rules of respect. One that calls passion aggression and confidence instability." She paused. "And we're done pretending it's invisible." She didn't take questions afterward. She didn't need to. Because the clip, the real one, kept playing. In classrooms, in newsrooms, in courtrooms. It became something more than viral. It became vocabulary. Weeks later, in a high school civics class in Philadelphia, a teacher played the footage as part of a unit on rhetorical framing and the power of perception. The students watched quietly. No notes, just faces staring at the screen. Afterward, one girl in the back raised her hand and asked, "So, she didn't yell and still won?" The teacher smiled. "Yeah," she said. "Sometimes clarity doesn't need volume. It just needs truth." The screen faded to black, but the echo didn't. Because some moments don't end when the cameras cut, they begin. This story was intense, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.